Welcome, everybody. My name is Warren. I'm the Chief Growth Officer over at Upptic, and we're coming to you today with a little report we put together to look back on 2022 that we're calling our State of Games Growth. For a little background on Upptic, we basically do all things to help games grow. So we have what we call a growth services team that provides user acquisition and Web3 marketing services to bring players into games. We have a creative team, we have a data science team, and then we have a platform that ties all of this work together, automates and provides insights. 2022 was a crazy year. So we think that this might have been the most transformative year in modern gaming history. And there's a few reasons for this. We kind of boiled this down to 4 macro factors, which we're going to dig into today. So these 4 factors are changes to the privacy landscape, overall worsening financial macro conditions, the first real contraction that we've seen in gaming as a segment, and then the birth and potential early death of Web3 games. So any one of these things would have been really high impact, but together we think that it potentially represents a whole new era of gaming. So what do we mean by a new era of gaming? Historically, when we look back, we think about 2 main prior eras of gaming. The first we're going to call the premium era, and this was defined by fixed upfront purchase in games, largely bootstrapped businesses, physical distribution dominating desktop and console as the dominant mediums. The audience for this is niche, self-identified gamers rather than mainstream. The second era, we're going to call the free-to-play era. This is the era that we're living in today. And this is dominated by what we see for the most high-grossing games today, where there's a free game to download. There's in-app purchase, ads, and subscriptions as primary monetization devices. We have the advent of the idea of a game as a service rather than a ship and forget kind of product, but everlasting product with continual updates and continual monetization, and largely powered more by venture capital and digital distribution. Obviously, mobile emerging as a dominant gaming segment, and the audience really expanding to be a more broad audience, including a lot of people that don't consider themselves a gamer. So what is this next era? We're going to get into that shortly. So here's a couple of views we put together that we thought were good for some anchoring. On the left, we wanted to take a look at a breakdown of revenue by gaming segment, which we've broke into 3 major segments of mobile, console/PC, and Web3. And we see 2 notable trends that I think are worth calling out in this view. In 2021, the first time that we see mobile clearly surpass console and PC as a gaming segment by revenue. And the second trend is that there's an emergence of Web3 as having a blip on the map for revenue in 2021. On the right, we think is another trend view that's really important to note, which is the amount of new investments by a gaming segment. For the past several years, this has been dominated by new investments in mobile, but for 2021, after a brief blip the prior year, 2020, we see Web3 just absolutely blast off and really dominate new games funding. We'll get more into that. Privacy changes is the first macro trend that we want to take a look at. So the foremost privacy change that's impacted a lot of the gaming landscape, with mobile being so dominant in this era, is the advent of Apple's iOS privacy changes and the implementation of SK Ad Network, also known as SCAN. So the advent of these privacy changes has meant a number of areas of impact for those working in gaming. First and foremost, measurement's worse. It's harder to know the efficacy of your marketing. Targeting is harder. It's tougher to find the right users. Advertising is getting more costly and less cost efficient. And we're seeing this lead to gaming profits declining, ad budgets shrinking, and overall game revenue shrinking. The next macro factor is the macro itself. We all know that this year has been a crazy year for the markets overall, with a lot of downturn in the stock market, particularly for valuations of technology businesses, including the game segment. This has been, in conjunction with inflation surging, the Federal Reserve increasing its rates, and we've all seen the market crash, really a discount in growth businesses and new investments slowing to a lot of tech and growth segments. And gaming companies have been hit as hard as any segment here. There's less money as there's more difficulty in fundraising for gaming. Next, we want to take a look at the macro trend of contraction of gaming as a segment. We're coming out of COVID and really in what we'd call the COVID hangover phase right now. During COVID, we saw a huge and somewhat surprising spike in gaming revenue. This is a byproduct of people being stuck at home, having less options for entertainment, and many people either starting to game for the first time or spending increased time and money in gaming as a form of entertainment. Since the end of the COVID peaks, we're seeing that we really pulled forward from some future revenue, and we're seeing the first drop off in gaming revenue that we've really seen in recent history. Advertising costs have also increased during this time, and because of these tightening financial conditions, we're seeing reduced investment overall. So what's the outcome of all of this? We're seeing layoffs, we're seeing discounts in mergers and acquisitions, we're seeing straight up shutdowns of gaming companies, and brain drain with a lot of the talent leaving traditional gaming. What does this mean? Is the free-to-play era dead? Maybe, maybe not. We'll get into that. So the next macro factor that we want to get into is the birth and potential early death, of Web3 games as a segment. In 2021, for the first time, we really saw blockchain gaming as a segment blow up out of nowhere. This was really off the back of Axie Infinity as the first real viral sensation to come from Web3 gaming. This really exploded the dawn of what was the ultimately short-lived play-to-earn era, where people were playing games like Axie primarily as almost like a gig economy additional revenue stream, which has ultimately proved somewhat unsustainable in these early models. But this was sort of the first test of a Web3 use case in gaming. In 2022, we're really seeing off of the back of that early hype and those early winners, huge investments into Web3 gaming specifically as a segment. And we've seen so far already this year, over $5 billion invested into Web3 games. And as we alluded to earlier, we're seeing a lot of brain drain as a lot of game developers and gaming professionals from the traditional gaming segments like mobile, PC, and console moving into Web3 as a segment. And in fact, we're seeing in 2021, which is the most recent year that we have the full data, that about half of all net new gaming investments by count are in Web3 as a segment. And you see that that's a clear outlier from prior years. But it's not all roses for sure. We're seeing a ton of pushback, particularly by players and by the gaming press. So what we've seen is there's pretty negative narratives overall in both player communities and gaming press. Players actively not only dislike, but I'd say outright hate the concept of NFTs in gaming. And we're seeing that traditional games media is taking a very defensive position, mostly with very negative pieces towards the technology, and more likely to call out negative things happening in the segment than interesting new developments or breakout titles. The last really important factor is it's still a super small segment. So there's different estimates or different metrics that you could use to count active users of Web3 gaming. But the best estimates for our team, if you throw out Axie Infinity, which really has its own economy and player base, is that there's maybe currently about 60,000 active players. So what's the verdict on Web3 gaming? Is it dead? There's a ton of investments, lots of building. There's not a lot of really high quality games and players so far, but we do think that we're still in the very early days. And because of some of these indicators we're watching for where investment and talent are going, we do think that it's worth keeping an eye on for sure. So that kind of brings us back to this idea of the next era of gaming and what's that going to be? So going back to the same categories that we looked at for the premium and free-to-play era, what is this next era? So when we're thinking about monetization for this new era, we're thinking about not that it's going to be replacing the prior area, but more enriching it. So I think we'll see some of the winning strategies from in-app purchase, free-to-play models, and subscription models. Even premium games still continue to exist, but we'll see these aspects from Web3 economies and ownable assets, so elements of play to earn or what's known as free to own, starting to layer in as an additional monetization and economic layer in these games. We're also seeing the bar really being lowered for who can be a developer. As technology becomes more affordable and accessible, we're seeing smaller teams really be able to come to market and create high quality products that can be competitive in a way where they would have been really blocked out in prior years. Interesting too, we're also seeing that funding is getting some innovation in that realm. So different types of crowdfunding, I think, will be a dominant theme in this next era, both traditional crowdfunding styles, but also crowdfunding via Web3, via player owners, and bootstrapping through NFT sales and things like this. We're also seeing that there's new distribution channels emerging, such as Epic Store and several like Web3 native distribution platforms, as well as potential in-vehicle, not something that's there so much today, but something we think will be part of the next decade of gaming platforms. And we also think that we're going to see a lot more dissolution of the idea of a mobile game versus a PC game. And instead, cross-platform really becoming the norm, people having the same gaming experience in different ways across mobile, PC, console, and emerging formats as VR, AR, and again, in-car experiences. And the one really positive trend that we don't expect to end is just increased adoption of who is a gamer. They may not call themselves a gamer, but we do see gaming becoming increasingly ubiquitous as a form of entertainment, to where it's just going to be something that everyone does in varying capacities, similar to how pop culture is consumed on TV and movies. We think that games are just going to continue to be an increasingly big part of pop culture. So how can you prepare for the next era? There's a few things that we're thinking about as a team here at Upptic. The first is really just challenging our assumptions in the same way that we all had to reinvent our strategies when premium gaming moved to free to play. We think that this is another time to really go back, challenge your assumptions, fall back to first principles for rethinking these challenges. We're all going to need to try new things. We're going to fail a lot along the way, both in the tactics we try and the technologies we build to solve these. And we just have to embrace that there's going to be failure along the way and still embrace that spirit of experimentation. Another big part of this is that we're going to need to solve problems together. This really means finding communities of like-minded individuals, whether you're a developer or a marketer, of people that are working on these new problems, work on them collaboratively, share learnings as we're building and shipping games. This is the fastest way that small groups will gain edges and find ways to break through the noise. And then the last thing is really, this is not all bad. Yes, it's chaos, but chaos breeds opportunity. And those that seize it, those that are willing to work through the pain, we really think this is an opportunity to craft new winners and break out, both as businesses, but also as individual people who lead on innovative solutions to these problems. So that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed our little take on the impact of 2022 on the state of games growth. And again, this little piece of content was brought to you by our team here at Upptic, where we do all things to help games grow. If you'd like to learn more about how we can help your game, you can reach us at upptic.com. That's upptic.com.